Good afternoon. A very warm and hearty welcome to our distinguished guests, and of course to our special guest today, Aigboje Aig-Imoukhuede. So I've known Aig for many years. Actually, the first time we met was at an event in 2007 in Abuja. Where else but the Hilton Transcorp? And I remember our editor at the time, Anwar Versi, interviewing Aig for the second issue of African Banker magazine. So my name is Omar Ben Yedder. I'll be here to take you through the book launch of a great book that I finished reading last week. It's called Leaving the Tarmac by our guest of honor today, Mr. Aigboje Aig-Imoukhuede. And it's about buying a bank in Africa, but it's much more than that, actually. The book is very readable. I found the style very accessible to bankers and non-bankers, actually. And it was very clear, concise. It was, I mean, the way I describe it, it's a playbook for anyone wanting to grow a successful enterprise. Also, what I enjoyed about it, obviously, I was there since, I've been at the group since 2003. I've been following the Nigerian story since then. And the banking story was a fascinating one. And people who read the book will be able to find out why. But you recount a number of incidents and years that I followed closely, and so it was a very easy read. I found it enjoyable. It wasn't full of jargon. On the contrary, you explained things in a very matter-of-fact way, which makes it accessible, as I said. And and it was a pleasant read. I read it during Ramadan when my belly was hungry, but you still kept me captivated. And actually, I'll get to some points in terms of what I think the book could have done more, but where the book could have gone further. But we'll talk about that in a second. Well, first of all, I'd like to ask you one question, actually. You mentioned it a little bit in your introduction. It's about the lack of books written by Africans, and especially the lack of. I mean, in fiction, we're seeing a great renaissance of African writing. But in terms of the business and in terms of African thinking, there's a lack of African business and management books. I mean, you quote Sefer Pati in your book on, and I will read that. I will read. You make me want to read his book on Nigerian banking sector. But there are few good business books on Africa by Africans. So what got you to write a book? Why did you decide to write a book?
Thank you, Omar, and thank you to your publication for hosting this discussion. And indeed, actually, as you spoke, I looked back at the fact that you had a front row seat to my chapters of the Access Bank story. And I believe you are still covering that story because my successor, Herbert, is doing a great job, with his chapters. Why don't we have more books and more stories like mine? The first thing, of course, is that, and it's unfortunate that we don't have that many stories of African business unicorns. Of course, that comes down to the state of economies across Africa, which in itself can, boils down to poor economic management. But, nonetheless, we do have stories. And I wrote this book, in a sense, to kickstart this culture of Africans telling their stories so that, the world can see that Africans, when given the opportunity, can do what citizens across any country in the world can achieve. There is this great book that I read by a guy called Reginald Lewis. And, in it, in fact, this is what he titled his book. In it, he was asked the question, about his drive for success. And this is the reason why he wrote the book. He said, "Why should white guys have all the fun?" That's the title of the book. And so, I'm challenging African businessmen, to do great things and have fun whilst they do it.
Great. Look, in terms of the book, as I said, it's very clear. It's also very methodical, which is a good thing about it. You mentioned, and we'll talk about it, but you mentioned risk, governance, and lots of other issues, including integrating two banks into one. But and when people look at entrepreneurs, they sort of see where they are today, and they say, okay, yes, oh, this is easy. Yes, I can do this. But ultimately, I mean, there's one thing. Maybe, I mean, you do discuss it a little bit, but you'd obviously been gearing up to this. You didn't just wake up one day and say, I want to buy a bank. You'd obviously been preparing yourself mentally for maybe 10, 15 years before this big moment where you bought Access back in 2001, 2002. So you'd obviously been gearing up and preparing for this moment for a while. So can you maybe talk to us about mentally what you were going through as you were going through your career in your early days within banking after studying law?
So, my career in banking actually started as a lawyer, as a corporate counsel in a bank. And I write about that in my book. What I don't really disclose is that even as an intern, postgraduate intern, what we called our national 1 year of youth service, compulsory youth service, I worked at Chase, which was then called Continental Merchant Bank. And as a youth corp, I remember writing an opinion on some banking issue. Now, youth corpers weren't allowed to sign off on opinions. Only the managers of the businesses were allowed to do that type of thing. And so my opinion was signed off and penned by my manager, my boss, the head of the legal department. And it was circulated as our opinions tended to be circulated around the whole bank. And a gentleman called Fola Adeola made this comment on that opinion. He said, "This is the best legal opinion I have seen or come across, in my banking career." And my boss was kind enough to point out the fact that I didn't write it. There's this, this youth corps intern who wrote that. All I'm pointing out here is that, look, if in everything you do, you pursue excellence, you prepare yourself for that moment when, you will be thrust in a position of responsibility where you can discharge it. I felt, and so did Herbert, that in all honesty, we were prepared to run a bank. And we've been doing and preparing ourselves for literally, the better part of our careers. So when I tell an audience, about the most important thing for leadership, it's preparation. And life is much easier when you are prepared. The reason why a heavyweight boxer, goes into the ring and emerges, or anybody emerges, victorious, usually boils down to preparation.
And I'm happy that you mentioned both Fola from, I believe, GT Bank, which is a bank that you also speak about quite fondly in your book, but ultimately Herbert. So I don't want to call him partner in crime because you weren't involved in criminal activities, but your partner and your I don't want to say soulmate, but obviously, I mean, in one chapter you say that the work had taken its toll. You were involved in raising capital for the bank, and you were working incessantly for many years leading up to this moment as well. That he actually, you were hospitalized for some time, and he actually gave you some blood. So he contributed to your well-being. So you guys are sort of brothers separated at birth. But you talk about what I want to speak about really is the importance of Herbert to you and to taking that step from being a bank employee to say, okay, I'm going to go by myself or with a partner. I'm going to have a crack at this. And you talk about, 4 eyes are better than 2. You mentioned it a few times in your book, the sort of the 4 eye strategy. So how important was it to have someone like Herbert? And do you think, in terms of your advice to entrepreneurs, is it best to go on an adventure with someone else so that he's got your back and you've got his?
So thanks, Omar. Herbert and I built a professional friendship. We didn't know we were building it with any particular venture in mind. I think the common thread running through our lives was that we were both civil service children, as we called it. Our parents came from the civil service. We lived a similar adolescent experience. He went to school in the north, I went to school in the north, both in these elite federal secondary schools. and we both found ourselves in banking. From a professional standpoint, I think particularly people we work with, that we share the same DNA. And simply by that, I meant the fact that our default setting for excellence, for achievement, is excellence. I mean, we both share that. And so we had many common points by which we could resolve issues between friends. Now, when it comes to the Access Bank story, I was given a book by my late brother-in-law when I was in Harvard for 3 months. He had just finished his and a Harvard MBA alumni as well. And we, in the book, okay, it told me that there are two paths for somebody like me. One is to continue what I was doing. The other is to go off and take a more entrepreneurial position in life. I chose to take the entrepreneurial path, but I then had experienced, working with Fola and Tayo, and I could see in the banking context, especially, how the notion of co-founders, 2 heads, 4 eyes, seemed to, beat, every competitor who operated singly. Okay, and I mean, those lessons were not lost on me. And so when I decided to my own bank, I chose to adopt that model. The decision was based fundamentally on competence and the ability for this partner to continue to run even if I was hit by a bus and no longer able to drive this dream. The second condition, of course, was that there was alignment. And so the fact that, Herbert and I were great friends helped that alignment. It's very difficult to find somebody who meets all your competence criteria and your alignment criteria. That, I think, is God, and that's not me. And I'm saying this in symbiotic terms. For Herbert and for me, in terms of our experience together, it's almost impossible to find that type of combination in terms of where you are great friends and you believe fully in each other's competence. Now, I only add that to people who say, okay, fine, this is the model they want to pursue, and therefore you're looking for this Aig-Herbert type of combination. You may not find that. You may, but it's not going to be easy. But speaking to the issue of going off on your own, if you are not the type of person who knows how to somebody else, then our partnership model is not for you. However, every entrepreneur and every business that is built needs partnerships. Your partnerships may not be as intense as ours, but I can assure you, you will need partnerships. And at the end of the day, the rules to building great partnerships are the same. Whether it's the type of partnership that Herbert and I enjoy, or it's going to be more of a federated, less intense type of relationship that you have with your partners, whoever they may be. And the golden rule is simply this: partnerships are like gardens. The more you nurture them, the more you put into them, the greater they flourish. And like gardens, when you become too busy, too distracted, or whatever, or too tired to nurture your garden, you know what happens. Same thing happens in partnerships.
Okay, fantastic. Look, at the beginning of the book, you also mentioned how your mum couldn't believe that you would be buying a bank, and it's I find it very interesting actually, because I didn't know the whole history of the merchant bank and the retail banks, and also the whole sort of godfather. You had to have a godfather behind a bank to support you, etc., etc. So that's fantastic insights there. But what I want to discuss really is, you bought, and at the time, people see the Nigerian banking system today. They see these great banks that are performing very well, and they're seeing competition between 20 banks or so. But at the time when you purchased the bank, there were sort of 100 or so banks. Access was languishing in the bottom quartile, so I think number 70 or so. And you obviously had ambitions to be a top 10 bank within 5 years. And you talk about, you went on numerous retreats to work out your USP. You know, how can we compete with the top banks? What can we offer that they don't do? And you talk about this very interesting concept called value chain banking, which I hadn't heard before, actually. And you also mentioned a great anecdote about MTN and how you helped MTN grow. So obviously, these were glorious days to some extent. Obviously, it's easy to romanticize about the past, but obviously we had, you know, a new democratic government, the end of the military regime. We had some sort of super cycle in terms of commodities, thanks to Chinese growth. We had the telecoms boom, and you're going to talk to us a little bit about this banking consolidation. But really, what I'm interested in is, how did you work with MTN? And tell us a little bit about value chain banking and how you managed to develop it.
Well, thanks, Omar. I mean, you set up the context for this very well. Remember that, you know, MTN, even though a new company, all right, in Nigeria, was already this African success story. And they were very discriminating in their choice of bankers, and they knew exactly what they wanted, and they were very, very strict in terms of terms, etc. So here was Access Bank. Very, very limited branch network. Very limited capital. Very limited liquidity, okay? And therefore, you know, what in God's name could we do for MTN? This reality is what caused us to focus on something that would be of comparative advantage to us. We knew that when it came to the understanding of serving a customer, and if you like, strong analytical capabilities of, you know, various sectors, and then an experience, you know, of playing intimately with the leaders of those sectors to understand their pains, etc., as they build their companies. One thing we knew that we could do is that we could, you know, come from a completely different perspective in talking to our customers. And so our pitch simply was like this: see, MTN, we know that we are not on the top 10, top 20, top 30, top 40 lists or top 50 lists of banks you should be dealing with. But there's one reason why we should be on your list, which is this: we will study your business and understand it as well as you do. And we will share with you exactly how to overcome weaknesses in your business, largely from a finance and banking standpoint. But if we went beyond that, I'm sure you wouldn't mind. And typically, they would look at us. Of course, we had the credibility of having worked in GT and so on. And they say, okay, let's see exactly what these guys are talking about. So we would deconstruct the entire value chain of MTN. And in doing so, we came up with two very, 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 very key issues for MTN. One was that they needed a distributor model that worked for Nigeria. The traditional distributor models that they knew in other African countries it didn't lend itself easily to Nigeria. We don't have malls. We don't have a retail footprint, you know, as you would have in other markets. At that time, obviously, you didn't have digital technology that allowed for virtual airtime distribution and so on. So you needed a physical distribution system that worked. And so literally we partnered with them, you know, to create distributors, identified school distributors, trained distributors, came up with the most dynamic distributor financing package, and very quickly became the top bank. The other thing, of course, was the whole issue of their infrastructure. There are two things that make a good telco. One is, of course, the ability to distribute their airtime, but also fundamentally important is the quality of that airtime. And rolling out a national, you know, telco infrastructure in Nigeria is not an easy thing to do. It's a large country. The geology and, of course, the geography of Nigeria, you know, can be very challenging and so on. So we came up with this, again, identified local construction companies who would be on a turnkey basis, go out there and do these rollouts. But of course, they didn't have capital. So we came up with this concept called a cell site in a warehouse. And we had these huge giant warehouses, and a supply chain management system where we would import, the components of a cell site, generators, steel, and everything you want, okay? And we would release them to these local contracting companies, okay, maybe 5 cell sites at a time. So the risk was limited. So even though there was enough in terms of thousands of cell sites in a warehouse, the risks of failure were managed by us. So I mean, you can understand, how effective this model would be. But importantly, also, we did not necessarily limit ourselves to the domain of finance. And sometimes we found ourselves doing the same type of thing as, a McKinsey or Accenture consultant, would do. It turned out to be a winning model. We rolled it out not just for MTN, but across, corporate Nigeria.
And it's, ultimately, it's very smart. Today, everyone's speaking about big data and trying to make sense of that big data. But ultimately, that's exactly what you were doing to some extent. I mean, you knew the whole value chain inside out, which means that you could lend to some distributors because you knew that you understood their credit risk. You also understood what their revenues would be. So you understood the whole value chain, and you could develop the whole your whole banking system around that value chain. So it's ultimately smart business as well. Look, if I have one criticism of the book, actually, is that occasionally you leave the reader wanting more. So I understand that, when you read it, you clearly see that there's no point scoring here. It's not about, saying, oh, I'm better than you, look at the mistakes that this bank made or that, and we did better than them. Even though we want a bit more juicy details, of course. But what I mean by that is, for example, you mentioned that following the bank. So we want a bit more detail in terms of maybe some of the mistakes that you made. So you mentioned that following the banking consolidation, you embarked on a period of very fast growth. That also meant that it was sometimes faster than what was practically possible. So you didn't necessarily have the human capital to make sure that the excellence that you expected from from all the divisions to be pervasive throughout this fast growth. So what were the mistakes that you think you could have not avoided, because we all make mistakes and we learn from them, but what were the mistakes from your period of fast growth that you endured?
Let me put it this way, Omar. And I was talking to a friend of mine, about this. I'm glad that we made the mistakes we did when we did. You will always make mistakes. But I guess the most successful enterprises or the most successful leaders are those who make big mistakes when they can, so that those mistakes don't take them out or take them down. Okay. So look, in a sense, all those mistakes, right, were like a school of experience, okay, where the benefit you get, right, from those experiences far outweighs the cost, of those experiences. Such that I'll give you an example. Buying a bank in Côte d'Ivoire, and which I write about in the book, certainly taught us how to buy a bank that is under the watch of a regulator. And if we didn't have that experience, it's not likely that the risks of the Intercontinental acquisition, which were completely transformational for us in Access Bank, would have been managed with the degree of success that we managed them. It's impossible not to make mistakes when you're growing at the rate we were growing. Remember that when we bought Access Bank, essentially, Access Bank had $1 billion of capital, say circa $10 million of capital. And we injected and recapitalized it to the tune of $10 million. That took it to $20 million of capital in 2002. 2 years later, all right, we'd taken our capital, all right, from $20 million to, in other words, from 2 billion naira to 25, billion naira. In other words, we'd gone, from $20 million to $200 million plus. But let me tell you, 2 years later, by 2007, we'd gone from $250 million to, $1.3 billion. So, capital find, its uses. And when you grow, at that pace, it's not likely that all the uses, will give you the type of return that you intended.
Fantastic. Look, a quick pause, actually, not to my questions, but just or some housekeeping, should I say. You can find out more information about the book by going to www.leavingthetarmac.com, and there's all the information in terms of purchasing the book and everything about it in terms of where you can get it in your different countries. You mentioned Intercontinental Bank, and if there's one part actually in the book where you feel that you suffered, when I say suffered, actually, no, I mean there are other bits where you feel that it was hard work, but the Intercontinental Bank seems to have been a struggle. It wasn't as easy as you anticipated. It seems to have not taken its toll, but it was it sucked energy out of you, possibly even some frustration. Would that be accurate?
Frustration in the sense that when you do a combination and culture is one of your challenges. I mean, you're dealing with people, and you are trying to bring two cultures to work and gel, and of course, if the overall position of the other party is negative, as in all things, in every courtship and every marriage, it's frustrating if your partner, isn't coming to the table with the joy and glee that you hoped. So in that sense, if you want to use the word frustrating, yes. But from the perspective of business combinations and so on, we'd already done a three-way combination, what was Marina Bank and what used to be Credit Lyonnais in Nigeria, in 2004, 2005. We'd already acquired a number of banks in East Africa. I mentioned Cote d'Ivoire. So I think that if there is one financial institution that has an understanding of how to do inorganic growth, and that's Access Bank. It's Access Bank is the proverbial M&A growth machine. So there were no frustrations to the fact that we already know in M&A that you have surprises. So when we get surprises, it's baked in. We aren't surprised always by that. But like in everything in life, we're human beings. So, business combinations are not combinations of numbers. They are combinations of people. And, I'm not a robot. Neither is Herbert. Neither is anybody in Access Bank. And so we would love, of course, for it to be seamless all the time, but sometimes it's not.
Okay, I'm happy you mentioned culture. So in your book, you also say that for that first year, and possibly longer actually, you went on weekend retreats. So to the extent that people thought you were some kind of new sect or church, new church that was gathering supporters because you were all day and all night. So culture was obviously very important to you. But tell us a little bit about those retreats and about how you strategized to define that culture and to define what you wanted to be.
These are the parts about the Access Bank story that I enjoy the most, and these are the things that I share in particular with people that I'm opportuned or privileged to mentor. You see, when I look at human endeavor and I see human beings as a society or as a team or when it's an organization, go beyond what is ever expected and achieve what people describe as the extraordinary, okay? I went down to this fantastic team dynamic, this readiness and willingness to almost die for one another. Indeed, actually, when it comes to building countries, okay, and building societies, you know, they say that the trees of liberty are watered, you know, by the blood of citizens. So we went into those retreats every weekend simply to understand each other, to create a common language, to share blood, not physically or biologically, but certainly in terms of ideas and in terms of an exchange of trust, if you like. And by each time we went, okay, we were building this, and I love this team, this New Zealand All Black type of team culture and dynamic. And it made it difficult to outcompete us. It still makes it difficult to outcompete Access Bank based on the foundations of that 1 year. Those foundations are very deep and they remain very that.
Look, you also mentioned that you went on a big recruitment drive, ultimately recruiting graduates. And I remember in that interview back in 2007, you said that that you probably got the most rigorous recruiting program in Nigeria at the time. And I remember from the interview, I remember hearing you and saying, okay, you talked about the Access Academy here. Our editor calls it the Access University, and in the book you call it something else. But which is and the 2 points that caught my eye in the book is that you say that you also sent your non-exec directors, so new non-exec directors, on courses, so that they would also adopt the Access Bank culture and standards that you expect from them. So even your non-exec directors, you sent them on courses to make sure that that they were top notch. Ultimately,
I mean, thank you. I mean, it became stuff of legend. What it means to be a director, just what it means to be an employee. I mean, our NEDs had an onboarding period of, I think, 90 days, and thereafter we had this curriculum. Okay, with the assumption that an NED would be with us for at least for 10 years. We had this curriculum that covered everything from banking and finance to sustainability and to even their personal health and well-being. Of course, corporate governance and things like that, as well. And it's simple, I just know, this is not that I believe, I know, and this is held true to be, I think, you cannot, this is inviolable. If you invest wisely in people, they will always improve. Okay? Now, if you have recruited the best people and you invest wisely in the best people, then their output is almost without limits, other than, of course, God. So that's the principle. So even if it is a director or an entry-level person or even an intern or someone who handles a door, in terms of a doorman or whatever, okay, we look for the best and we give them the best in terms of training and exposure.
Yeah, one of the questions that's coming up here is from actually the former an executive director at the Afri-Exim Bank. It says, what is your single most important factor you'll attribute your success? So maybe you can think about that one. But there's one bit actually, and maybe it answers it. It answers it through this. But you interviewed every single person that was recruited by Access Bank over the years as a CEO. I mean, in the book it says 5,000. When I spoke to you offline, you said there's even up to 10,000 people that you interviewed personally. So basically that shows immense attention to detail ultimately, and making sure that each box is ticked and that we haven't left any stone unturned. I mean, what is this? Is this, would you say that one of the key factors to you attribute your success to is that obsessional quest for perfection or for excellence?
I think the most important factor is God, the Almighty God. I am a Christian, and I very much believe in His unseen, invisible hand doing wonderful things in my life, and He still does. There are too many things that happened in our story that were not me, we're not Herbert, we're not, just time and chance, right place, right time, everything comes together. And look, so that has nothing to do with us. So that's fact one. I can assure you that if you are a business person and you have that type of force, behind you, you will write many books. But, in everything that I have also read about success in human endeavor, there is this overriding drive. Okay, it could differ from one person to the other, but the passion that is pushing this person, whatever it is, man or woman, okay, all right, has to be of such fervor that they are almost ready to die for their cause. And was I? Yes. Did I almost die? Yes. And thank God I'm still here with you.
Okay. You did. So look, in the bank, people who haven't followed Nigerian banking, I mean, I think it was 2004, the central bank governor brings in all the bank CEOs to, I don't know if it was Lagos or Abuja, but anyway, gathers all these bank CEOs and tells them that they need to have a minimum capital of 25 billion naira by the end of December 2005. So basically, the theory was that if Nigeria is going to develop, it needs big banks that's going to support its development. But also, you obviously wanted to get rid of those banks that weren't performing, and it's what people call the great banking consolidation. In your book, you praised the central bankers for their role, Professor Soludo at the time, but also before him and after him, Lamido Sanusi, and before him, I forgot it's another
Joseph Sanusi. So you had Joseph Sanusi, yeah. Soludo, and then Lamido Sanusi.
That's right, yeah. And but you said, I mean, one statistic that stood out. You said that it was one of the most efficient consolidations that had taken place anywhere in the world, costing 1% of GDP. So, so what does that mean exactly? Sorry.
So hold on. Are we talking about Chukwuma Soludo, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So basically, when you look at a consolidation, a banking consolidation effort, particularly one, okay, that is addressing the issue of risk, systemic risk. So is not always systemic risk, right? It must simply be about alignment between the banking system and the economic demands of the country. But many a time, banking consolidation is propelled not by economic growth, which is what Soludo was after, and Obasanjo, by the way, who wrote it in the foreword to my book. But in this case, there were two things that they sought to achieve. And the first was that with 90 odd banks, okay, the ability for the regulator to properly supervise this heavily fragmented industry was very expensive, to be honest. I mean, every bank, however small, needs a certain quantity of bank examiners, etc., etc. The central bank board of governors will review every bank's financials and will receive reports on each one, etc. Look, listen, I mean, doing that for 80 odd banks that really have no true impact or relevance or contribution in economic terms can be a very costly exercise. So this is, one of the reasons for consolidation. The other one, of course, is that, when you have several small players, okay, contagion risk is actually, strangely enough, higher than when you have a defined number of fairly large players. And that may be the antithesis of, the thinking of too big to fail. No, but the issue is this, all right? When you have several small players, a run on several small players is easy to occur and is easy to transfer to the big players because it magnifies the risk of the industry in the minds of the public. So when the public hear that this bank is distressed, that bank is distressed, turn around, this bank is that in terms of the percentage of deposits, etc., that all these banks represent, it's not material. So again, these are some of the reasons why they embarked on it. But clearly, the principal reason was they needed banks that could drive Nigeria's growth. Story, clearly successful. So what I was speaking to was the fact that typically consolidation has a cost to be met by taxpayers or the regulator. Typically, and this is simply because those banks that couldn't consolidate, and of course you're going to have to pay out depositors and so on. Or the other thing that you might have to do is that you might actually have to give incentives, to others, to acquire or consolidate, to acquire them. And in this case, the banks that were taking over, where the cost of it was a fraction of GDP.
Okay, makes sense. Look, I'm going to talk about Nigeria, leadership to some extent as well, education as well. I know time is short, but anyway, you've got this academy, you're training people, you're trying to raise the bar. But even then, you said in your book, you write that you are worried that the culture of mediocrity that was pervasive in daily life in Nigeria threatened to bring your ideals down. I mean, the pervasive in daily life in Nigeria, that's me. But you said the culture of mediocrity threatened to bring your ideals down. So, how do we change this, and how do we change this culture at a national level, and make sure that mediocrity doesn't become pervasive in our daily lives and bring us all down?
Well, I'm going to take a bit of time in responding to this question, simply because this is very, very important to me. Very, very important to me. So look, I was born in Ibadan, in the southwest of Nigeria, okay, to civil servants. I was born in the University Teaching Hospital. It was one of the best hospitals in Africa or the world at the time. The doctors who oversaw the process were some of the best doctors in the world at the time. Okay, and I wasn't the child of royalty. I wasn't the child of a wealthy individual, I was just simply the child of ordinary Nigerians. So I point to, the Nigeria I knew at birth, and I love history. Okay, and the history that I've read, and I've read parliamentary proceedings in the UK at the time of independence. Our civil service was described in several debates, not one, or this is over time, pre and immediately after independence, by MPs, by civil servants. They speak about Nigerians that they've interacted with in our civil service at that time. I'm talking about pre-60, and they speak about them in terms of clearly knowing that the senior civil servant in Nigeria at the time could be a senior civil servant in the best British, in British civil service was the best civil service, okay? Uncles and aunties that I knew, whether biological or non-biological, who were writers, wrote books that sold in their hundreds of thousands. The artists I knew, would have kings and queens commission them to do, works on them. Okay, this is the Nigeria I knew. The soldiers in Nigeria were the most sought after when it came to the United Nations trying to intervene. So that's the Nigeria I knew. I went to a government secondary school, which was as good as any secondary school education as you would find anywhere in the world for the first 3 years. And then all of a sudden, if I use my school experience case, after 3 years, it just went spiraling downwards. Now, I'm not saying that corruption started around about 78, 79, when I talk about the fact that my school just went to the dogs from this top elite institution to this really, really overpopulated. Anyway, I don't want to go into that. Now, right? The root of this downward spiral, it's the greatest excuse to throw merit out of the window. And I spoke to you about my own default setting for achievement. It's high, it's excellence. Corruption causes us to reduce our default setting and our expectations even as a people, all right? And so reducing them until you get to zero. And that is essentially the process that leads to a failed state. And so, this is the reality of building an access bank in that type of environment. And we said, let's create this oasis of sanity where our people come, and when you come into Access Bank, when you come to work, you are transported out of this sorry story, okay, into an environment where we are pursuing excellence just like you would have it anywhere else in the world. But of course, the problem was that, at some point in time, people have to go home. And when they leave the office and they drive back into that traffic, they leave our oasis of sanity. Why is this very important to me? Because if we give up, if we allow this corruption effect leading to mediocrity, take its root, Nigeria, doesn't stand a chance.
You mentioned that your father was a civil servant, and actually in the book you say, you had a comfortable living, decent education, as you mentioned, from the school. But you said that also the damage done to the Nigerian economy, I believe in the early 80s, had decimated living standards of honest civil servants. So going to the private sector was a no-brainer for you. But look, I've been following African politics for a while, and I know that we can't develop strong institutions and a government, and a strong government, that one that leads to change, if we don't have a strong civil service. So how do we change this? How can we change this whole mediocrity within the civil service and make sure that civil servants can also live a honest life for them and their children?
Well, I would say that if I look at my life today, and if I think about the triple bottom line that should concern any human being about what they do, in other words, the profits you make, the planet you live on, and the people you interact with. So I have devoted my life now to addressing this issue that you've raised. I believe that the only way of addressing Africa's challenges, and we must start with Nigeria, because if Africa is going to get it right, Nigeria must get it right. I quote Nelson Mandela. We have to take Nigeria back to that time when the British civil servant, the British government considered the Nigerian civil servant and the Nigerian government to be on par in terms of their effectiveness and their ability to perform. Now, Nigerians are high IQ citizens, and so also for a number of other African countries. So it's not as if we don't have the talent. Even within the service today, we have brilliant young men and women, but they have suffered a huge underinvestment in their welfare, in their training, in their leadership, in inspiring them, and so on. So we have the Africa Initiative for Governance, which is one of my philanthropic platforms under the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation. And together with my wife, Ofowe, okay, we've dedicated our resources to building this pool of outstanding civil servants. This business of rebuilding Nigeria and Africa is not a business for sprinters, and this is a marathon. And we have, 20, 30-year timeframes in mind, and indeed, actually multi-generational. We will hand this over to, the next generation of Aig-Imoukhuedes. But before, hopefully in the next 20 years, we will go to from where we are now to us contributing about 4,000 highly trained public servants to the Nigerian public service.
Okay, fantastic. Look, there's a lot of questions that have come through on the chat. I'll read you one, and it's always a question that I've asked myself. So how long did it take you to write the book, and how did you create the time you needed to write it? I mean, was this something that you wrote throughout your career at Access, or was it a post CEO project?
So thanks for the question. Whoever asked it, I started writing it around about the first quarter of 2014. I left Access Bank December 2013. And I said to myself that I would take, I went back to school. So here is this CEO who's retired from an owner-managed scenario, fortunate and blessed by God to be part of an African unicorn story, which he part owns. And I chose to go back to school to do an MBA. I just wanted to, leave that high horse of what's the word, attention and so on, and just get into a classroom with younger people and get attuned to the realities of life. And during that period, basically 24 months, that's when I wrote the book.
Okay, so you did an MBA post Access Bank.
Yes.
Okay, and did you learn something from the MBA? Was it useful to you, or was it things that you already knew in terms of governance, risk management, finance, etc.?
There were two parts of this learning experience. There was the part when my own knowledge and experience of, professionally and life, put me ahead of the class. And then there was the part about technology, new ventures, new business, new worlds, new ecosystems that put me at the bottom of the class. So, great, I had to look for balance, give where I knew and take where I didn't.
Okay, fantastic. Look, there's a question here from Alina, and it's about lending to youth and women. It's how do we persuade African lenders to take on the risk to support the youth and to women-led businesses and women entrepreneurs?
So I can talk about lending to women because I know professionally, I know a lot about it. Access Bank is one of the pioneers in this field across Africa, and maybe you can argue actually in the world. So I think it was around about 2005, or maybe even earlier, that we embarked on this initiative for gender finance, the first African gender finance program. We did that with the IFC, and then it's just blossomed and blossomed and blossomed. So the first thing is that generally women make better borrowers than men. And it's not the realization, the challenge is not that banks don't know this. The larger societal issue is that if you live in an Abrahamic world where the man's data is deemed to be more important than the woman's data, and the man's data is collected, the woman's data is ignored, okay? Then of course you begin to have this almost institutionalized discrimination against lending, because you need data to lend. And these are some of the fundamental things we need to address so that women can access credit. So why is it that many women actually own their assets, or maybe things are changing now, in their husband's name, for instance, okay? Why is it that many women can't have separate accounts from their husbands? I'm talking about when I got into the game, okay? Things have changed significantly, over that time. So there are fundamental barriers that have to be cured at the societal level. Now, of course, banks that are sensitive to these societal challenges now can design ways to overcome those things. I remember, I'll tell you something. We took the first loan form that we designed for women, okay, for women borrowers. We actually took a template from I can't remember where, certainly not Nigeria. And in it, okay, when I was reviewing the template that was sent to us, we were reviewing it. We had certain questions around the income of the husband. And from a lending standpoint, you can understand why you ask that question, okay? So it's not as if the question is not with merit, okay? But in truth, okay, from a credit worthiness standpoint, the question is irrelevant, okay? And so I'm just telling you how you have these institutionalized biases that make it difficult for women to have access to credit. Suffice it to say, however, that I think that overall in Nigeria, with the work that has been done around sustainability, with the assistance of development finance institutions and multilateral institutions, and with just a growing consciousness by the Nigerian banking professional that, you know, there is a responsibility to females. You know, there is a better mindset, okay? I kind of feel that to really shift the needle, however, we need the type of public servants that I've described, you know, coming up with policy that makes it impossible for lenders and data managers, all right, to discriminate against women.
I've got another. Thank you for that. I've got another question in terms of values and cultures from Stella Okudzu, and she says, "What specific tips would you share around defining and sustaining organizational value and culture? My thinking is that you did not fire all the Access Bank staff of old. So basically, you know, you came in, you bought a bank. You obviously have what did you do to change the culture that was there? Because you didn't just get rid of those people and replace them with your own team members."
One of my, thanks Stella, one of my favorite lecturers, university lecturers, and this is when I spent 3 months in Harvard, was John Cotter, Professor Cotter. And he teaches leadership. And I can paraphrase his book, one of his books, I think Leading Change. It's obvious that I read, and I almost, you know, anyway, but Leading Change, and he says there are four types of people, so to speak, you will find in your organization when it comes to culture, and the culture that your organization desires, or you, the leader, desire for your organization. You have those people who, you know, are completely aligned with the culture you seek, and they want that culture. The next category are those who believe in what you are doing, but could need a bit of work for them to really become flag bearers of the culture. You then have the third group who, you know, are really neither here nor there. Okay, they don't like it. They don't, you know, they don't care for it. No, not that they don't care for it. They don't like it. They are not neutral. Okay, but they are not damaging. I mean, you know, you can win them over. And then you have the last category, which is the category that you will never win over. And you know, John Cotter basically says, you know, for that last category, get rid of them as quick as possible. So that is the real category that you do the exiting with immediately. They don't tend to be, well, okay, they are not typically a great proportion of the population, but they could be very toxic to the culture that you seek to build. And then it's about working on the three other groups, and your success is then going to be a function of how well, you know, are you able to move people from the status quo to the desired culture that you pursue.
Great. Look, I've got a question from Rwanda here. Christian Bugabu, who's at the is an investment executive at Growth in Rwanda, country head. So he says, looking back and knowing what you know now, what would you do differently if you had to go back to the drawing board?
Great question, Christian. I would have more shares in Access Bank than I have today.
Fantastic. Okay, look, someone's written, this is Charles Iden. He says, in the author's note at the beginning of the book, you said you delayed the release of the book and would only disclose why if you ever write an autobiography. We're curious to know why. Any clues? Basically, you finished writing the book, I think, in 2015, but you delayed the publication until late last year or early this year. So are you going to reveal anything?
No clues. Wait for my next book, or wait for my autobiography.
Okay, look, we've more or less run out of time. I'd like to put one last question to you, if I may. I mean, when we look at your career, people can say that it's a conventional career. What do I mean by that? I mean, obviously you're a high achiever, but you graduated in law. You went to work with an established blue chip, so to speak, and then you bought a bank. Obviously, a lot went to buying it and growing it, and this is what this book is about. But if you were 16, 17, or even 2022 today, what do you think? What career would you think you'd embark on? How do you see things?
Thanks, and it's a good way to close our conversation. I think the first thing is that look, there are no accidental African unicorns, or there are no accidental unicorns. I mean, you better master whatever it is you are going to go into, as either before or as you do it. If you aren't the master of the game, you aren't going to succeed with that spectacular result. If we are using my story as a benchmark. Now, for me, if I was 36 or even younger now, and I'm pursuing entrepreneurial opportunity, I think that now, interestingly, you are more spoiled for choice than I was. And I will explain. You see, in our time, all right, our entrepreneurship for the professional was very much, right, subject-led. Subject-led. In other words, banking, finance, law, and so on. Go look at any of the stories, okay? That is if you're a professional, okay? And in Africa, there are not many manufacturing stories around, if you like, the manufacturing process or agric process, okay? Because of that reality. There are not many, okay? Now, today, in the world we live, and the type of ecosystems that exist, there are opportunities to make billions based on your interest. So it no longer matters what you studied or what you mastered from a subject matter standpoint. What matters is, what does your interest lead you to master? And if therefore, okay, my interests are in, for example, creating, all right, an animation based entertainment solution, all right, that can get millions of Africans paying for that content, okay, I don't have to be, I could be a lawyer and find myself there. I could be a doctor and find myself there, etc. So for, in terms of what to do and how to do it, wow. First of all, I mean, obviously, let your passion for that thing be completely overwhelming. There is no compromising that, and go in for things that you can, with friends and family, okay, establish your credibility in. And then, okay, the third thing is that if you can call Aigboje Aig-Imoukhuede and his investing platform, it would help.
Thank you, Aig. I mean, when you read the book, what you see is also planning is very important. Things like governance are things that you need to take very seriously. Making sure you've got the right culture, the right values. So you can't mess around with that. So the book is informative there also for budding entrepreneurs in terms of how to grow a business, and that you don't cut corners in this. Success is not built around cutting corners. So thank you all for watching. So I think you can find everything in terms of reading reviews of the book, finding book stockists, as well as information on the foundation and the internships, etc. that you offer. If you go to www.leavingthetarmac.com, and when you read the book, you'll also understand why I chose to call it Leaving the Tarmac, which is also an interesting anecdote. But I'll leave that for you to discover when you purchase and read the book. I thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure as always. Thanks for the tips. I think our viewers enjoyed it too. So thanks and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Omar. I really enjoyed this. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you. Thank you.